When we come into Parshat Beshalah, we meet a people who have just left slavery, but have not yet learned how to live as free human beings. The Torah tells us, "Vayhi b'shalach paro et ha'am, v'lo nacham Elohim derech eretz plishtim, ki karov hu. Ki amar Elohim, pen yenechem ha'am b'rotam milchama, v'shavu mitzrayma." When Paro let the people go, God did not lead them by the direct route, although it was nearer, because he said the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So, on the simplest level, this is a story about a longer road. But there's more to it. It's a story about how much we see, how much we're shielded from, and what that does to our soul. Hashem chooses not to expose them to immediate war, pen yenechem am, lest the people regret and turn back. It sounds like protection, even compassion, but it also raises a question. If a person never has to face hard things, will they ever grow the muscles to stand in hard times? We see the answer almost immediately. When the Egyptians chase after them and they find themselves trapped between the sea and the army, the people break. They turn to Moshe and say, "Hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamot b'midbar." Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? And then, Tov lanu avot et Mitzrayim mimutenu b'midbar. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die here in the wilderness. Sforno says that even if Paro wasn't going to fight them and kill them directly, just blocking their path felt to them like a death sentence. To die of thirst and hunger in the desert, in other words, they go straight to catastrophe thinking. If there's an obstacle, we're finished. Rabbeinu Bechaye, one of the great Spanish commentators and a renowned darshan in Zaragoza, wonders, how can the same people who cried out to God a moment earlier now speak with such biting sarcasm, "Hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim," as if God and Moshe brought them out just to bury them in the sand? Seforno brings the Mechilta, which says there were actually 4 groups among the people at sea. One group wanted to throw themselves into the water. One group wanted to go back to Egypt. One group wanted to fight. And one group wanted to pray. In other words, they don't have one unified reaction. They have 4 different survival responses: despair, retreat, aggression, and faith. This is the psychology of a people who have been protected from certain experiences, but deeply wounded by others. They have seen miracles, but they have not yet built their inner resilience. They can sing at the sea, but when the next crisis comes, they crumble again. We hear this again when there is no water. Lama zehelitanu mimitzrayim lamit oti ve'et banai ve'et miknai batzama. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill me and my children and my livestock with thirst? Because they were really doing so much better there, we know. But each time something goes wrong, they go straight back to Egypt was better. This is the mindset of slavery. We see this contrast so sharply when we look at our own story. On October 7th, young Israeli soldiers, many of them raised in a world that we like to call cocooned, with parents and a society that tried to protect them from trauma, they stepped into the horror, into the war, and chose again and again to run toward danger, to defend others. Forces us to ask, what's the difference? Part of the answer is that seeing hard things can break you, but it can also make you. The question is not, do we expose people to pain? The question is, when they see it, do they see it alone or inside a story, a purpose, a covenant? Now back to Beshalah. After the splitting of the sea, Moshe and the people sing. In that song, they describe how the nations around them react. Az nivalu alufei Edom, ele Moav yachazei Moad, namogu kol yishvei Canaan. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed, the mighty ones of Moab. Trembling grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan are melted in fear. Terror and dread fall upon them through the might of your arm, God. They are still as stone. The Seforno notes that these nations were terrified just from seeing the miracles, even though they knew that Israel wasn't actually coming to fight them. Fear can paralyze not only the persecutor, but also the bystander. The spectacle of God's power freezes them like stone. So we have, at the same time, a people who have seen too much suffering and yet too little responsibility. Nations who have seen great miracles and are frozen in fear. And a God who leads his people on a longer road, not because he wants to weaken them, but because he knows where they are fragile. In the middle of the desert, Hashem begins to retrain their inner world. With the manna we hear, Zeh hadavar asher tzivah Hashem, liktu mimenu ish lefi ochlo, omer lagulgolet, ish la'asher bo'alo tikachu. This is what Hashem commanded. Each of you shall gather as much as he needs to eat, an omer per head. Each household shall take according to those in its tent. Here Hashem is doing something very delicate. On the one hand, liktu, you must go out and gather. You are responsible. You must move your body. You must take action. But on the other hand, you may not hoard. You must trust that there will be a tomorrow. For a people who've lived through terror, hunger, and unpredictability, this is an emotional reprogramming. We know of stories from the Holocaust, from survivors, how natural it was to hide food, to store bread under a pillow, to never trust the next meal would come. That's not stubbornness, it's trauma. In the desert, Hashem is slowly teaching, do what you can do, and I'll fill in the rest. And yet, even with daily miracles of food and water, we still read, Vayavo Amalek ve'elachem im Yisrael beRefidim. When Amalek came to fight the Israelites in Refidim, the Jews broke, the Israelites break. Hashem shelters them from what would break them completely, but he allows enough challenge to force them to grow. So where does this leave us as individuals, as a people still reeling from October 7th, as Jews around the world who have seen images and stories that can never be unseen? There's a balance between protecting and preparing, between shielding the next generation from every pain and equipping them to stand morally and spiritually when pain finds them anyway. Our ancestors in the desert show us what happens when miracles are outside, but not yet inside. They saw the sea split and still said, Tov lanu avodat Mitzrayim. Our young soldiers and so many civilians on that terrible day show us what it looks like when inner covenant is strong. When a person says, I'm terrified, but I'm responsible. I am part of this story. Maybe the invitation of Beshalah this year is to ask ourselves, what have we been shielded from and what have we learned to face? When we see war, hatred, or suffering on our screens in our communities, do we freeze like the nations who watched from afar? Or do we step in like those four groups at the sea and choose our response? Are we choosing despair, retreat, fight, or prayer? And perhaps most importantly, how do we raise a generation in Israel and around the Jewish world that is not crushed by what they see, but also not naive about it? A generation that gathers its omer of responsibility each day, trusts that there will be enough for tomorrow, cries out to Hashem when it must, and still moves forward. Ad yavor amcha Hashem amzu kanita. Until your people pass over, Hashem, the people you have acquired. May we be that people who passes through seas, through deserts, through tragedies, not as frightened slaves of yesterday's pain, but as a diverse, resilient, united Am Yisrael who knows how to see, who knows how to feel, and how to keep walking, how to stand up for the oppression that is around the world and be proud and strong. Shabbat Shalom.